Sleep didn't come easy to Tom that night. When he finally awoke, he could still visibly remember the nightmare. Waves upon waves of creatures overrunning his position, ammo running low, no hope of survival. It was weird, because Tom didn't have nightmares often. The only other time he could remember having them was after his brother's death. It seems yesterday's events had really pushed him to the brink. Dragging himself through the kitchen, he started to make breakfast for him and Javqua. Speaking of Javqua, she's usually awake by now. He placed the stove on low so he wouldn't burn the food, and made his way to her room. He knocked, only to receive silence. "Okay, Javqua, I'm coming in." Opening the door, he walked inside and stood next to Javqua. He placed his hand on her head. She was cold. Too cold. Being cold-blooded really did have its downsides. He picked her up and made his way to the main room's heater. It was a bit difficult to carry her thanks to her size, but he managed. He tried to place her next to it, but she wouldn't let go. Tom noticed she hadn't woken up. It seems her brain's sleep state could tell that there was a lot of heat coming from Tom, so she unconsciously held on. Realizing she wouldn't let go, he made his way to the couch on his right and sat down, laying her over his lap and placing a blanket over her body. Thankfully, it was one of the 3 off days during the week, so he didn't have to worry about being late for anything. Having her on his lap did give him time to think. Whenever he had a nightmare, it was always the same. Always his brother's death, always from his brother's view. Tom had no idea why he had that dream again. It wasn't a pleasant one. He did know how, though. His brother and him were connected via their implants during his final moments. Tom had to watch as his brother was torn apart by hordes of Zelios Chaviks, lovingly renamed Death Crawlers by the Marines. Javqua slowly started to awaken, pulling Tom back into the real world. Her eyes slowly opened. She stared up at Tom for a solid 10 seconds before speaking. "Morning, Tom. What's happening?" Tom was only now realizing how odd it must be to wake up on your best friend's lap. "Well, you forgot to turn on your bed heater, so I carried you to the heater, but you wouldn't let go, so..." Javqua, now realizing what had happened, looked up and with a quiet, soft voice, "Thank you. I really mean it. Mind if I stay here? It's comfortable and you're warm." Javqua gave Tom an embarrassed smile. Tom returned the expression. To Tom it felt odd, yet nice. Javqua was his only friend on the planet and the only other predator in the school. For the next half an hour, Javqua stayed, lying on his lap. They conversed during this time, just enough for Tom to forget his earlier thought on his nightmare. Unknown location. "What do you mean he saw you? You're supposed to be the stealthiest person among us. Explain yourself." The Magistrat spoke, well more shouted at the very scared Vincel. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he could see me. He just turned around all of a sudden and stared directly into my eyes with his predatory gaze. It was terrifying." The Vincel was constantly trying to hold back the urge to make himself into a ball and be as small as possible. The Magistrat rolled his eyes before addressing the rest of the room. "We have to know as much as possible of this Thomas before we can get rid of him. His arrival has made it too difficult to get rid of the scum that is the Krakovac. We will have a predator-free school, and one day even a predator-free galaxy, for they are nothing but a burden to the universe that needs to be eradicated." The room of prey species replied, with nods and words of agreement. Tom and Javqua made their way out of the dorms, their bond having been hardened. They did enjoy sitting around talking, but Javqua insisted on taking Tom into the city centre to see the sights and buy some stuff from the shops. Tom didn't really enjoy these sorts of public places, but if it was with Javqua, he could enjoy it. He enjoyed it even more so as Javqua was taking him to a virtual arcade. He wasn't expecting it, but sometimes the unexpected can be awesome. Javqua. It seems her choice had gone down well with Tom, as he was basically floating down the pavement. Javqua wasn't just doing it for him though, as she was also looking forward to playing some full dive VR games. Walking into the arcade, Javko and Tom made their way to the best-looking game they could find. It was Survive the Hunt. A monster controlled by the staff would hunt the players in a dark jungle with broken huts scattered around the play zone. It was designed for the most strong-willed of sentients. They weren't really expecting for two predators to be hunted. The monster couldn't die in this game, but it could be hurt. Of course, the pain would be lowered, but still a pain that the staff member would feel. On the other hand, the hunted could also feel the pain, but their characters could die. So their objective was to survive for as long as possible. After reading this, Javquar looked at Tom, the most predatory of grins plastered to his face. He had an idea. She knew it. The game started, and the players found themselves in the middle of a spooky jungle. The previously cocky prey species now had a look of pure terror on their faces. Not Thomas. His face still had the same predatory grin. Tom looked straight at her. "I have a plan. Follow me." The Hunter. Tanvika enjoyed his job. All he had to do was scare some weak prey. His scaly claws shook with excitement. Looking around, he could see the tracks of his prey, but he could only see 6 out of the 8 beings' footprints though. He had made his way through the forest. He had killed 6 out of the 8 players. For some strange reason, he couldn't even find a trace of the other 2. It was weird as if... Pain made his way all through his body. A long stick was protruding out of his abdomen. Thanks to the pain, he was unable to hear the footsteps coming his way. Javquar. Tom's stick, or spear as he called it, was thrown with absurd accuracy, from an even more absurd distance. The hunter was too in pain to notice her coming at him at full sprint. She jumped and clawed at the hunter. He screamed in agony and ran away as fast as his injuries would let him. The sudden sprint flung Javquar off of his back and onto the ground, or what she thought was the ground. Just before she made contact, Tom jumped in and grabbed Javquar and made his way back up the tree he was in and made his way after the hunter. He jumped between each tree with Javquar on his back. The hunter had now become the hunted. After the game had finished, Javquar and Tom made their way out of the arcade, smiling and laughing. Unbeknownst to them, the staff member, Tanvika, was being dragged to counselling by the other staff. His legs had given away and he was trembling uncontrollably. 1,000-yard stare plastered to his face. He only said one thing over and over. "They are coming. They are coming. They are coming." Many years earlier. It had been 6 weeks since planetfall. The ODSTs had dropped planetside first to clear the area of death crawlers, so the ground base could be constructed, allowing the other Marines to be of use. Gunnery Sergeant Alexandros Martin was one of these ODSTs. The first drop was rough, as the infestation was much larger than ever seen before. His platoon had suffered heavy casualties thanks to the Office of Naval Intelligence and their trustworthy data, saying that the infection was small and should be easily eliminated. What Oni hadn't told them was that they would have to hold back tens of thousands of death crawlers for 6 weeks straight, with crates of food and ammo being scarce at best. They were only now able to construct the ground base. But not before the majority of the orbital drop shock troopers were long dead. Alexandros himself was only able to survive thanks to his best friend's bravery. Bravery that cost him his life, but not before Alexandros had his arm ripped clean off. Thankfully, the medics were able to patch him up and replace his arm before he bled out, but the mental torture was enough to make him near mute, only speaking when absolutely necessary. He no longer allowed himself to become attached in any way to the other Marines. The only person left that he cared for was his younger brother. They kept in contact as much as possible using their neural interfaces. It was during one of these neural connections that another wave had been spotted heading their way. Forgetting he was still connected to young Thomas, Alex made his way to the wall to hold off the attack. Thomas watched the carnage through his brother's eyes, his young brain horrified as he watched men and women be ripped apart with little effort by large armored monsters that looked like a mix of a monkey and a scorpion. He could only sit in the corner of his room and cry as he watched his brother desperately fight off the nightmarish beasts. He watched as his gun ran empty and a death crawler jumped on top of him. Alexandros. I did everything I could to hold the death crawler away from me. For once, I was grateful for my prosthetic arm, it being the only thing strong enough to hold its knife-like tail at bay. With my other arm, I reached for the combat knife at my hip. I quickly jammed the 8-inch blade into its armored neck. The being screamed, giving off a hellish sound to make me cringe. I yanked the knife back and forward in an attempt to end his disgusting life. The thing thrashed its limbs in all directions, its claws narrowly missing my face. 10 more seconds of screaming, the thing was finally dead. Pushing the body off of myself, I made my way to my feet. Looking down, I could see my crimson blood pool around my feet and mix with the Xenos' disgusting neon green goo. His claws had left me with deep wounds. I was lucky it hadn't hit anything too vital, but if I didn't get patched up soon, I would surely bleed out. I yagged my knife out of the deathcrawler's neck and made my way to the rest of the tired and beaten up soldiers. One of them must have noticed me because she made her way over to my position and handed me a shotgun. Glad to see you survived. Didn't think anyone could live through such a close encounter. Her voice was rough like all veterans, but still had that calming aspect to it. I nodded, in my usual semi-mute way. She seemed to like that about me. Ah, so you're the strong, silent type. A useful trait. The one-sided conversation came to an abrupt halt, thanks to the second wave of death crawlers coming our way. We no longer had the manpower or the ammo to hold them off. I could hear sobbing in my ear. I knew exactly who it was coming from. I considered breaking the link, but decided against it. He had already seen enough to be scarred for life. He might as well know how his brother dies. Goodbye, Thomas. I'll see you in the next life. The sobbing turned to all-out crying as he watched his brother, his idol, die. He watched as his vision became blurry, as his limbs were torn off. He watched his last breaths come and passed till the connection was lost.